Amelia Carter had buried her father alone, kept her land alone, and learned to stop waiting for anyone to come back. She had made peace with that. Then the storm hit, and something collapsed against her fence post in the dark. Not something. Someone. A man. Bleeding, barely breathing, his horse trembling beside him. Every instinct told her to close the door. Instead, she grabbed him by the collar and dragged him inside. She didn't know his name. She didn't know his past. She only knew she couldn't let him die. If this story already has your heart, subscribe to our channel, follow along until the very end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story has traveled. Amelia Carter had not cried at her father's funeral. She had stood at the edge of his grave with her hands folded in front of her, and her jaw set so tight, her back teeth ached, and she had not let a single tear fall. Not because she wasn't grieving, but because the moment she let go, the men standing around that grave would see it. And those men were already circling. She had seen it in their eyes even before the casket was lowered. The sideways looks. The murmured conversations that stopped the moment she turned around. Franklin Dade, who owned the largest parcel of land in the valley, had the nerve to approach her before the dirt was even shoveled. "Miss Carter," he said, hat-in-hand voice, smooth as creek water in summer. "I want you to know I'm deeply sorry for your loss. Your father was a good man." "He was," Amelia said. "If you find yourself in need of anything, any guidance on what to do with the property, my door is always open." She had looked at him for exactly 3 seconds. "I know what to do with my property, Mr. Dade," she said. "Thank you for coming." She turned away before he could say another word. That had been 11 months ago. Now it was July, hot and dry and relentless, the way Rocky Mountain summers could be when they wanted to punish you. The creek that cut through the lower pasture was running low. The grass in the south field had burned golden 3 weeks ahead of its time. Amelia had spent the morning hauling water from the upper spring by hand because the pipe that fed the holding tank had finally cracked overnight, and the repairman in town had told her it would be 2 weeks before he could get out. 2 weeks. She had nodded, thanked him, and gone home to fix it herself. She was 40 minutes into digging up this broken section of pipe when she heard the horse. Not her horse. Biscuit was in the barn. This sound came from the far end of her fence line near the old gate she'd been meaning to rehang for a month. A labored, uneven rhythm, hooves moving wrong, stumbling, stopping. Amelia set down her shovel and listened. The horse cried out. A short, panicked sound that meant exhaustion or injury, or both. She grabbed her rifle from where she'd leaned it against the fence post. She never worked the property, unarmed, not anymore, and walked toward the gate. The horse was a dark bay lathered white along the neck and flanks, one of its rear legs moving stiff and wrong. It had managed to push through the gate latch somehow. The old iron swung half open, and the animal was standing just inside her property, with its head low and its sides heaving. And slumped forward against the horse's neck, barely staying in the saddle, was a man. Amelia raised the rifle. Not to shoot, not yet, but because a strange man on a strange horse turning up at the edge of your property. In the middle of the afternoon meant you kept your options open until you understood what you were looking at. "Hey!" she called out, loud and clear. "You, in the saddle. I need you to sit up and show me your hands." Nothing. She walked closer. The horse turned its head toward her, nostrils flaring, but didn't bolt. Tired. Too tired to be afraid. The man was tall, she could tell even with him folded over the horse's neck. Dark hair. Broad shoulders, under a canvas shirt that was soaked through with sweat and something darker. His hat had fallen back and was hanging by its cord. His hands were tangled in the reins, but loose, like his grip had finally failed. "Hey," she said again, sharper this time. She put her hand on the horse's nose, steady and firm. "Easy. Easy now." The horse exhaled. The man groaned. He was alive then. Amelia shifted so she could see his face. His jaw was set, eyes half open, and she could tell from the way his mouth was pressed shut that he'd been holding on through sheer stubbornness for God only knew how long. "Can you hear me?" she said. His eyes moved to her. Brown. Dark brown, and even through the pain and the exhaustion, she could see them working, taking her in, reading the situation, trying to figure out if she was someone he needed to worry about. "Yes, ma'am," he said, low and rough like words that cost him something. "You're hurt." "Yes, ma'am." "Can you get down on your own?" His jaw tightened. He tried to shift his weight and made a sound low in his throat, not quite a groan swallowed before it could finish. "No," he admitted. Amelia propped the rifle against the fence close enough to reach. Then she moved to his left side, and she put her shoulder against his arm, the way she had learned to do with her father when he got too sick to manage the steps on his own. "On 3, she said. "Don't fight me." "I'm not in the habit of fighting women who are trying to help me," he said. "You'd be surprised," she told him. 1, 2, 3. He came down hard. Heavier than she expected, all of him muscle and bone and dead weight, and she felt her knees bend under it, but she planted her feet and didn't go down, and she walked him 3 steps to the fence and let him lean against it while she caught her breath. "There's a gash along your ribs," she said. She could see it now, the dark stain spreading through the fabric on his left side, too slow to be arterial, but too persistent to ignore. "What happened?" "Rockslide," he said. "Up near the pass. Couldn't get clear in time." "How long ago?" "Yesterday morning." She stared at him. "You've been bleeding since yesterday morning." "It slowed down." "It didn't slow down enough," she said flatly. "Can you walk?" "I can try." "Don't try. Tell me yes or no." He looked at her again with those dark, calculating eyes, and then something in his expression changed. Not softened exactly, just shifted, like he'd decided something. "Yes," he said. "Then come on." She got his arm across her shoulders and her arm around his waist, careful to keep her hand below the wound, and she walked him across the yard and up the 2 steps to the porch and through her front door. He was quiet the entire way. Heavy, deliberate with each step. She could feel the effort it cost him to stay upright radiating through the muscle of his arm, and she didn't say anything, because some men needed silence to hold themselves together, and she could tell he was one of them. She got him to the kitchen table. He sat. She let him. "What's your name?" she asked, already moving for the tin box, where she kept her medical supplies, thread needle, carbolic, clean linen. "Caleb," he said. "Caleb Thornton." "Amelia Carter." She set the box on the table. "This is my land. You rode onto it uninvited, Mr. Thornton." "Yes, ma'am, I'm aware." A pause. "I wouldn't have if I'd had anywhere else to go." She looked at him across the table. That was honest, at least. "Your horse needs attention," she said. "I'll see to her after I see to you. Take your shirt off." He didn't argue. He didn't make a comment. He just reached for the buttons with hands that she could see were trembling faintly, though she suspected he would have denied it if she'd said so. The gash was bad. Not bad enough to have killed him, not yet, but bad enough that she understood how it hadn't. It ran maybe 4 inches along his left side, deep enough to need closing. Whoever God kept station over stubborn, silent men on horseback had been doing extra work yesterday. "This is going to hurt," she said. "I expect so." "Do you need something to bite down on?" The ghost of something crossed his face. She thought it might have been amusement. "I'll manage," he said. I did. He sat completely still through all of it. The cleaning, which was the part she knew had to burn worst of all, and the stitching and the bandaging after, and the only sign she had that he was feeling any of it was the way his hand, flat on the table, pressed just slightly harder against the wood each time she worked. When she tied off the last wrap of linen, he exhaled slowly through his nose. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet. You'll need to keep still for at least a day, possibly 2. I can't stay 2 days." "You can't ride another mile in the condition you're in," Amelia said, and she set down the remainder of the bandage and looked at him directly. "You want to end up dead on someone else's fence, or do you want to be practical about it?" He looked back at her. Really looked the kind of looking that felt like it had weight to it, like he was deciding whether or not to trust what he saw. "I can sleep in the barn," he said. "You'll sleep in the back room," she said. "I'll put a cot in. Your horse needs the barn more than you do." He opened his mouth. She raised a hand. "I'm not negotiating, Mr. Thornton. You're hurt. You're on my land and leaving you to fend for yourself would be a waste of the last 40 minutes. Don't make me argue about it." He closed his mouth, and then again that not-quite smile crossed his face. "Yes, ma'am," he said. She saw to the horse before she made supper. The bay she would later learn her name was Clara, which Amelia found unexpectedly endearing, for a mountain horse had taken a blow to the right haunch in the slide, nothing broken but badly bruised and in need of rest. Amelia cleaned the scrapes along her legs, put her in the clean stall next to Biscuit, and gave her fresh water and a double measure of grain. Clara ate like she hadn't seen food in 2 days, which Amelia supposed she probably hadn't. When she went back inside, she found Caleb Thornton sitting exactly where she had left him, elbow on the table, staring at nothing in particular with the expression of a man who was very used to being alone and wasn't entirely sure how to act in the presence of another person. "Supper in an hour," Amelia said. "You don't have to feed me. You've lost a significant amount of blood. You need to eat." She moved to the stove. "I made a stew this morning. It'll be enough." Silence. Then quietly, "What do you need me to do?" She turned to look at him. "Nothing," she said. "I don't take charity well," he said. "Not defensive, just honest." "It's not charity," she said. "It's hospitality. They're different things. When you're healed up, you can fix that gate latch you rode through. That'll make it even." He studied her for a moment. "That's fair," he said. She found out more about him in pieces, the way you find things out about quiet people, not through questions, but through the small things they say when they're not on guard. Over supper, he told her he'd been coming down from the high country. He kept a small spread up near the timberline cattle, mostly ran them through the summer, and brought them down before the fall. "Alone?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am." "No ranch hands?" "Had one last year. He moved on." She nodded. "You said you had nowhere else to go," she said. "What about town?" "There's a doctor in Orrin Flat." Something shifted across his face. Not pain. Something older than pain. "I'd rather not ride into Orrin Flat if I can help it," he said. She didn't push. She understood in a way she couldn't have explained to anyone that some people had histories with places that made those places feel smaller than they were. She had her own version of that with certain people in town. "You're not from around here originally," she said instead. "No." He picked up his coffee cup. "Montana. Came down about 4 years ago." "What brought you south?" A pause. "Needed somewhere new," he said. She let it sit there. That was enough. The next morning, she woke before sunrise the way she always did, dressed and went out to check the animals. Caleb's horse was doing better. Biscuit ignored the intruder with the regal disinterest of an animal entirely secure in his position. When she came back in, she expected to find Caleb where she'd left him in the back room resting the way she'd told him to. Instead, she found him at the far side of the yard, one hand braced on the fence, the other working the broken gate latch with a length of wire and a pair of pliers he must have found in her barn. "Mr. Thornton," she said. He didn't look up. "Miss Carter, I told you to rest." "I've been resting for 8 hours." He worked the wire around the post. "I don't do well with resting." She stood in the yard and watched him for a moment. How was moving carefully. She could see it the way he held his left side slightly guarded, the way he turned his body to avoid the full reach that would have pulled at the stitches. He wasn't ignoring the injury. He was managing it, working around it, refusing to let it stop him from doing the one useful thing he could do. "Don't tear those stitches," she said finally. "I won't." She went back inside and made breakfast. He stayed 3 days. She hadn't planned for 3 days. She'd planned for 1, maybe 2, and then he'd be well enough to ride, and he'd go, and that would be the end of it. But Clara's leg needed more time, and Caleb, for all that he got up the first morning and started fixing her gait, was moving slower than he'd admit, and on the second evening when she came in from the south field, she found him sitting in one of the porch chairs, watching the sunset, with the particular stillness of a man whose body had finally forced him to stop. "You're in pain," she said. "Some," he allowed. She sat in the other chair without being asked. They sat in silence for a while, which was something she had learned in the past year and a half that not everyone could do. Sit in silence with another person and let it be comfortable instead of awkward. Caleb Thornton, it turned out, was very good at that kind of silence. "You've been running this land alone since your father passed," he said eventually. She looked at him. "Word gets around. Orin Flat is the nearest town to the only pass through those mountains," he said. "I ride through twice a year. People talk." "They do," she agreed. "Yes, since last September." "Hard year." "Every year's hard out here," she said. "You either get used to that or you leave." "You didn't leave." "No." He was quiet again. Then, "Why not?" It wasn't asked like a challenge. It was asked like someone who actually wanted to understand, which was different. "Because it's mine," she said. "Because my father built every fence post on this property with his own hands, and the people who want it from me haven't earned the right to have it. And because—" she stopped. "Because," he said. "Because leaving would mean they won," she said. "And I'm not ready to let them win." He looked at her for a long moment. "No," he said. "I don't reckon you are." On the third morning, she came out to find him in the south field. He had walked down to where the grass was worse, the section she'd been watching die a little more every day for the past 3 weeks, and he was standing at the edge of the dry creek bed with his hat in his hand, looking at the ground. She walked down to where he was. "The channel shifted," he said, not turning around. "See here, there used to be a secondary runoff coming down from the North Ridge. Got blocked somewhere up above. Rocks maybe. Or—" he paused. "Or something." Amelia looked at the dry creek bed. She had noticed the creek running low. She hadn't thought about why. "Something," she repeated. He glanced at her. "I could be wrong." "You don't sound like you're wrong." He turned the hat in his hand slowly. "You'd need to go up and look. But if someone put deliberate obstruction up there, rocks a berm, the creek wouldn't just run low, it'd dry out in sections." The back of Amelia's neck went cold. Franklin Dade's land sat on the North Ridge. She didn't say it out loud, but she thought it very clearly, and she watched Caleb's eyes and thought he might be thinking something very similar. "I'll go up and look," she said. "Not alone you won't," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me." He held her gaze steadily. "If that creek was blocked on purpose," he said, "then whoever did it has an interest in this land that you've got. And you riding up there alone on a trail that goes through their territory is not something I'm willing to let happen." She stared at him. "Mr. Thornton," she said slowly, "you have been on my property for 3 days. You are a guest here. You don't get to decide what I do on my own land." "You're right," he said without backing down even slightly. "I don't. But I'm asking you to let me ride up there with you, not to protect you, because 4 eyes are better than 2, and because if there's evidence of something deliberate up there, you're going to want a witness." Amelia looked at him for a long time. He didn't flinch. He didn't try to soften it or make it easier. He just stood there and waited. "Fine," she said. "Fine," he said. What they found on the North Ridge was a pile of rocks and heavy timber deliberately stacked against the natural channel of the creek. Not a natural rockfall, not erosion. Someone had done this with intention, with tools, with time. Amelia stood at the edge of it and felt something cold settle into the center of her chest. "How long ago?" she asked. Caleb crouched and examined the timber. "The cut marks on this wood are still clean," he said. 2 weeks, maybe 3. Right after the pipe cracked," she said quietly. He looked up at her. "My supply pipe from the holding tank cracked 2 weeks ago," she said. "I thought it was just age, wear and tear. I thought—" She stopped. "Someone was cutting off my water from both ends." The cold in her chest spread out through her ribcage. She had known Franklin Dade was pressuring her. She had known he wanted her land. She had not let herself believe, not fully, that he would go this far. "You need a lawyer," Caleb said. He rose to his feet and set his hat back on. "And a surveyor, and you need both before Dade makes another move." "I know," she said. "Do you know anyone you trust in Orin Flat? Someone who won't be in Dade's pocket?" She thought. Judge Harlow, she said. He's the circuit judge out of Prescott. He's not local. Dade hasn't got to him. Caleb nodded slowly. When does he come through next? 2 weeks. He nodded again. He looked back at the blocked channel. Then he looked at her. I'll clear this today, he said. Get the water running again. But you need to document it first. He glanced at her. Can you sketch what you see here accurately enough that it'd hold up? My father was a surveyor, she said. I learned to draft before I learned to cook. Something moved through his eyes. It wasn't sympathy, she didn't want sympathy. It was something more like recognition. Good, he said. She pulled the small notebook from her jacket pocket that she always carried, old habit from working alongside her father, and she began to draw. And Caleb Thornton stood at the edge of the blocked channel with his arms crossed and his eyes on the tree line, watching the north ridge, the way a man watches a horizon when he thinks something on the other side of it might be moving toward him. He stayed 4 more days, and when he finally rode out on the 8th morning, Clara walking easy and steady on her healed leg, Amelia stood on the porch and watched him go and told herself it was fine. He was a stranger who'd needed help and gotten it. She'd needed a witness and gotten one. They were even. She told herself that. She almost believed it. What she didn't know. What she couldn't have known. Watching the last of the dust settle on the trail north was that Caleb Thornton had ridden 3 miles up the pass before he stopped his horse, and sat there, and thought about a woman who drafted survey maps in her jacket pocket and refused to back down from a fight that wasn't fair, and looked at him like he was just a person, not a problem, not a story she'd already decided the ending to. He sat there for a long time, then he rode on, but he carried the thought of her all the way up into the high country, and it did not leave him. Not once. Not through all the long weeks of summer that followed. Not even close. Caleb Thornton had never been good at leaving things unfinished. That was the honest truth of it. The part he didn't say out loud to anyone. The part he turned over in his mind through the long, quiet weeks after he rode away from Amelia Carter's ranch. He told himself he'd done what needed doing. He'd cleared the blocked channel. He'd helped her document the tampering. He'd given her the name of a federal land agent he knew out of Denver, a man named Ruiz, who owed him a favor and wouldn't be bought by anyone in a valley as small as this one. He told himself that was enough. He was wrong. It started with small things, the way important things usually do. He'd be working the high pasture moving cattle through the timber breaks, and he'd think about the survey sketch she'd drawn in that notebook. Clean, precise lines drafted without hesitation by a woman who'd never once mentioned it was a skill she had. Just pulled the notebook out and started working because the job needed doing, and she was the one there to do it. He'd think about the way she'd said my father built every fence post on this property with his own hands, and the flatness in her voice when she said it. Not bitterness, something quieter than that. The kind of grief that had already been through the fire and come out the other side as resolve. He'd think about that look on her face when they found the blocked channel. Not fear, not tears. Just that cold, clear settling behind her eyes, the kind of expression a person gets when something they already suspected has been confirmed, and they're already 2 steps ahead on what comes next. He thought about Franklin Dade, who he didn't know personally, but knew by type, had known men like Dade all his life. Men who believed their money made them patient, and their patience made them inevitable. I thought she's going to need help before the circuit judge comes through. He thought that's not your problem. He thought she's one woman alone on 40 acres with someone actively trying to drive her off it. He thought you already helped. You did your part. You owe her nothing. He thought about the notebook in her jacket pocket. He turned his cattle south 3 weeks early. He didn't ride straight to her gate. That would have been presumptuous, and Caleb Thornton was not a presumptuous man. He rode into Orrin Flat first, because if he was going to be any use to her at all, he needed to know what was actually happening, and the only way to learn that was to listen. Orrin Flat was the kind of town that had its own opinions about everything, and didn't require much prompting to share them. He took his horse to the livery, got himself a meal at the boarding house, and spent an afternoon being exactly the kind of quiet stranger that people talked around without realizing they were being listened to. What he heard made his jaw tighten. The talk about Amelia Carter had been going on for weeks. And it wasn't the kind of talk that came from nowhere. It had the particular shape of talk that someone had been feeding, the kind where every story had just enough truth in it to be difficult to argue with, but enough omission to be a lie by another name. The Carter girl's getting desperate, they said. Running that ranch into the ground. Heard she's been letting men stay out there. Strangers off the road. Can't blame her all alone out there, but it don't look right. Franklin Dades offered her a fair price twice. She's the one being unreasonable. Caleb sat at the end of the counter and drank his coffee and listened to all of it, and he thought about a woman who had fixed her own water pipe by hand because the repairman wouldn't come for 2 weeks, and he felt something rise in him that he hadn't felt in a long time. Quiet fury. The controlled kind. The kind that doesn't make a sound, but doesn't go anywhere either. He left 2 coins on the counter, thanked the woman at the boarding house, and rode out to the Carter ranch. Amelia was in the yard when he came through the gate he'd fixed on the second morning, the latch holding clean and solid. She was carrying a bucket in each hand, moving from the well to the garden, and she stopped when she heard the horse and turned around. She looked at him for a long moment. "Mr. Thornton," she said. "Miss Carter." He dismounted, kept his hands visible, relaxed. "I know I'm not expected." "No," she agreed. "You're not." She set one bucket down. "Clara looks better." "She is. Fully healed." He glanced at the horse, then back to her. "I came down early. Turned the herd south ahead of schedule." He paused. "I had reasons." She studied him the way she'd studied him that first day, assessing direct, not impolite, but not soft about it either. Looking for the angle, looking for what wasn't being said. "Come inside," she said finally. "I'll put coffee on." It wasn't a warm welcome. It wasn't a cold one either. It was the welcome of a practical woman who had decided the conversation needed to happen indoors, where it couldn't be overheard. He respected that. He told her what he'd heard in town. All of it. Every piece, every thread of the story being built around her name, laid out plain and without editorializing, because she deserved the plain truth, and he thought she was someone who could handle it. She sat across the table and listened without interrupting. Her hands were flat on the table in front of her, and he watched them because her face was controlled in a way her hands weren't quite, and by the time he'd finished, her knuckles had gone white. "How long?" she said. "I don't know when it started, but it's been going on at least a few weeks." "The men," she said. "What they said about men staying here." "Yes." She looked at him. Her jaw was set. "That would be you," she said. "That would be me," he said. "I'm sorry for that." "It's not your fault," she said flatly. "You came here injured, and I kept you here because leaving you to die on my fence would have been wasteful. The fact that someone is using that as ammunition." She stopped, exhaled. Dade. Someone has been feeding these stories to people. Stories like that don't grow on their own. She pushed back from the table and stood up, which he'd noticed was what she did when she needed to move, when the anger needed somewhere to go, other than just sitting in her chest. She went to the window and stood there with her arms crossed. "Judge Harlow comes through in 6 days," she said. "I know." "Did Ruiz write back?" He reached into his coat and set a letter on the table. "Came to my address in town. He's been looking into Dade's other land acquisitions. There are 3 properties in the last 4 years where the owners had water access problems before they sold." She turned from the window. She looked at the letter. She didn't reach for it yet. "3," she said. 3. A silence fell between them, the kind that had weight in it that pressed down on both sides. "He's done this before," she said. Not a question. The flatness in her voice had taken on a different quality now. Not grief, not anger, something more focused than either. "Ruiz thinks so. He can't prove it yet. He needs documentation." Caleb tapped the letter. "He says if you can get him your survey documentation and a formal statement about the blocked channel, he can open a federal investigation. Dade's been filing fraudulent land claims across 3 counties. The creek tampering might be the thing that connects all of it." Amelia looked at him for a very long time. "Why are you doing this?" she said. It was a direct question. She was a direct person. He'd expected it, and he still had to think for a moment about how to answer it honestly without saying too much. "Because what's happening to you isn't right," he said. "And because I was there when you found that blocked channel which makes me a witness. And because I have nothing waiting for me up in that high pasture that can't wait a few more weeks." "That's 3 reasons," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "The last one," she said slowly. "Nothing waiting for you up there." She looked at him carefully. "Is that the true one?" He met her gaze. "All 3 are true," he said. "The last one is just the most honest." Another silence. Then Amelia uncrossed her arms, picked up the letter from the table, and sat back down. "All right," she said. "Then let's figure out what we're doing." He stayed. I didn't make a ceremony of it. He didn't ask for permission the second time. They'd already established the terms of that back at the blocked channel, and she'd said fine, and it still held. He moved into the barn the first 2 nights, which she didn't argue about, and on the 3rd night she told him there was no point in him sleeping on cold ground, when there was a perfectly serviceable cot in the back room, and he'd already used it once, and he took that for the practical offer it was, and moved inside. They worked well together. That was the thing neither of them spoke about directly, but both of them felt the way their rhythms fit. She woke before sunrise. He was already up. She checked the animals first. He went for the perimeter. She cooked. He repaired. By the end of the first week, they had settled into a pattern that felt less like 2 strangers figuring it out, and more like 2 people who had been doing this for years. The south fence needed new posts. He dug and set them. The holding tank needed a second intake pipe to hedge against another deliberate break. He ran the line while she mapped the water rights documentation that Ruiz would need. The roof of the smaller outbuilding had been losing shingles since spring. He climbed up and replaced them on a Tuesday afternoon while she stood below and handed up what he needed, and they talked. Actually talked more than they had managed in all the days of his first visit. "You said you were from Montana," she said, passing up a bundle of cedar shingles. "Born there, yes, ma'am." "What part?" "The Bitterroot Valley, west of here. Greener." "You miss it." A pause from above her. The sound of a hammer. "Parts," he said. "What parts?" Another pause. Longer. "The way the light comes in through the mountains in the early morning," he said. "Before anyone's moving. Before the day's gotten complicated." He drove a nail. The quiet of it. Amelia looked up at him. He was focused on the work, not looking at her. "You had a family there," she said. It came out before she'd fully decided to say it, not quite a question, not quite a statement. She watched his shoulders still. "Yes," he said. She waited. "My wife," he said. "And our son. He was 2 years old." The hammer didn't move. "There was a fire," he said. "On the ranch. I was out checking the far pasture. By the time I got back..." He stopped. When he started again, his voice was even and empty of everything. The way a voice gets when a person has told a story so many times inside their own head that the words have been worn smooth. "By the time I got back, there was nothing I could do." Amelia stood very still below him. "I'm sorry," she said. "It was 4 years ago." "That doesn't make it matter less." He looked down at her then. His face was not closed exactly. It was the face of a man who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and had gotten so used to the weight that he'd stopped noticing when it bent him. No, he said quietly. "I suppose it doesn't." She handed him another shingle without saying anything more, because she understood that sometimes the thing a person needed after saying something that hard was not more words. Just someone staying in the same place, not leaving, not making it smaller than it was. He went back to work. But something between them was different after that. Not dramatic, not sudden, just shifted. Like a door that had been stuck swinging open just enough to let in some air. The trouble came on a Thursday. She had ridden into Orin Flat for supplies, things she needed for the ranch that couldn't wait: flour and lamp oil, and a replacement blade for the draw knife. Caleb had stayed back to finish the east fence line. She had told him she'd be 2 hours and she would be fine. She was in the general store when she felt the shift in the room. There were 3 other women there. Mrs. Hollis, who ran the dressmaker's shop, and the Pryor sisters, who were both widows and lived together on the edge of town. They'd been talking when Amelia walked in, and the talking stopped in the way that talking stops when the subject of the conversation has just arrived. Amelia took a basket and began selecting what she needed. "Miss Carter," Mrs. Hollis said. The tone of it was not unfriendly. It was worse than unfriendly, it was careful. The kind of careful that meant someone had made a decision about how to handle a delicate situation. "Mrs. Hollis," Amelia said pleasantly. "We heard you've had someone staying out at the ranch," said the older Pryor sister. Dorothy. She was not being cruel about it. She was the kind of woman who genuinely believed she was being helpful. "I have," Amelia said. She put a sack of flour in her basket. "A man," said the younger sister. "Ruth." "A rancher who came through injured and needed somewhere to recover," Amelia said. "He's been helping with repairs in exchange for room and board. It's a practical arrangement." "Of course," said Mrs. Hollis. "Of course it is. We worry, you know. A young woman alone and a stranger." "He's not a stranger anymore," Amelia said. "He's a man I know, and what happens on my property is my business." She said it quietly, pleasantly, without a single sharp edge in her voice. But the three women exchanged a look. "Franklin Dade was saying," Dorothy Pryor began. "I'm not interested in what Mr. Dade is saying," Amelia said, still pleasant. "I'm interested in getting my supplies and getting home before the afternoon gets too hot." She set a bottle of lamp oil in her basket. "Is there anything else I can help you ladies with?" There wasn't. But as she carried her basket to the counter, she heard Dorothy Pryor say very quietly to her sister, "Not quiet enough. Poor thing, she doesn't see it." Amelia set her basket on the counter. She kept her face still. But on the ride home alone on the trail with the dust rising behind her horse's hooves, she let herself feel the full weight of it. The whispers, the careful looks, the story being built around her, around them out of pieces that had just enough shape to be convincing if you didn't look too close. She had known it would come. She had known staying was going to cost her something. She just hadn't known it would feel like this, like being slowly erased. Caleb was at the water trough when she rode in. He looked at her once, just once, and he said, "What happened?" She tied the horse. She unloaded the supplies. She told him. He listened without interrupting the same way she'd listened to him. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Dade was in town today," he said. She turned to look at him. "I saw him from the ridge when I was working the east fence," he said. "He rode through the North Pass this morning. He had 2 men with him I didn't recognize." The cold was back, right in the center of her chest. "2 men," she said. "Hired," he said. "The way they rode. The way they watched the fence line." His voice was even and flat. "He's not just pressuring you anymore." "He never was," she said. "He was always going to escalate. I just didn't know the timing. Judge Harlow's in 3 days." "3 days is a long time," she said. "Yes," he said. "It is." He looked at her. "I want to keep a watch on the North Ridge tonight. I'll take the first half. You sleep." She opened her mouth. "Not because you can't handle it," he said before she could speak. "Because I've done it before, and I won't sleep anyway." She closed her mouth. "Why won't you sleep?" she said. Something moved across his face. Not pain, just the acknowledgement of it. "I don't sleep well in general," he said. "Haven't for 4 years." He picked up his rifle from where it was leaning against the trough. "Go inside, Amelia." It was the first time he had used her first name. Neither of them pointed that out. She went inside. At 2 in the morning, she brought him coffee on the porch. She'd woken at midnight and found herself unable to go back down, her mind running through all the things that could happen in 3 days, and at some point she'd given up on sleep and gotten up and put the pot on. He was sitting in the chair closest to the north edge of the porch, his rifle across his knees, watching the ridge. She handed him the cup without a word. He took it without a word. She sat in the other chair. They stayed like that for a while the night. Quiet around them, the stars sharp and clear. The way they got when the heat broke after midnight, and somewhere in the dark, the sound of the creek running, which still seemed like something close to a miracle after what they'd found up on that ridge. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "When you came back," she said, "when you turned the herd south early, did you know you were going to stay, or did you tell yourself you were just checking in?" He thought about that. "I told myself I was just checking in," he said. But I packed for longer than a day trip," he said. "So I think I knew." She looked out at the dark. "I'm glad you came back," she said. And then, because honesty seemed to be the only currency between them that held its value, "I didn't expect to be. I expected it to be a complication." "Is it a complication?" She thought about the women in the store, about Dorothy Pryor's voice, about the look on Mrs. Hollis's face, not unkind, just certain, the way people get when they believe they understand a situation better than the person living it. "Yes," she said, "but not the kind I expected." He turned the cup in his hands. "Amelia," he said, and she had decided she liked the way he said her name, plain and direct, not soft, the way some men said women's names like they were trying to make you feel smaller. "Whatever happens in the next 3 days, I'm not going anywhere until this is settled. You understand that?" She looked at him. I was watching the ridge, not her. His profile was still serious, the rifle easy across his knees. A man who had made a decision and wasn't making a speech about it, just stating it as fact, the way you'd state the weather. "I understand," she said. "Good," he said. And they sat in the dark together, watching the north ridge until the stars began to pale and the first gray light of morning came up over the mountains, and nothing moved that shouldn't have. But the feeling stayed, the sense of something gathering on the other side of the ridge, patient and inevitable. And Caleb Thornton sat in that chair and did not sleep and did not leave. And the woman beside him knew, without needing to say it, and without needing him to, that when whatever was coming finally arrived, she would not be standing in front of it alone. The morning of the second day brought something none of them had expected. It came in the form of a rider not from the North Ridge, but from town, moving fast, and the horse was blowing hard when it reached her gate. It was Thomas Pryor, Ruth Pryor's son. 17 years old, lean and serious-faced, and he was down off the horse before it had fully stopped. "Miss Carter," he said. He looked at Caleb, registered him, and then back at Amelia. "My mother sent me. She said—" He stopped and got his breath. "She said to tell you that Mr. Dade was at the land office this morning, early, before it opened." Caleb set down the post he'd been carrying. Amelia went very still. "He had papers," Thomas said. "I didn't see them myself, but my mother's friend works the counter there, and she told my mother that Dade had a deed, a signed deed for the Carter property." He looked at her. "With your signature on it." The world went very quiet. "I never signed anything," Amelia said. "No, ma'am," Thomas said. "My mother believes you. That's why she sent me." Caleb was already moving toward the barn. "Where are you going?" Amelia said. "To Saddle Clara," he said, "because we're going to the land office right now, before that deed gets filed." "The land office doesn't open for another—" "It opens in 40 minutes, he said. "We can make it in 30 if we ride." Amelia looked at Thomas Pryor. "Thank your mother," she said. "Yes, ma'am." He hesitated. She also said she's sorry about what she said in the store. She said she should have thought it through before she spoke. Amelia was quiet for a moment. "Tell her that means a great deal," she said. "Tell her it truly does." Then she went to saddle her horse. They made it in 28 minutes. The land office clerk, a young man named Peters, who went pale when 2 people walked through his door, moving with that kind of purpose, confirmed it within 5 minutes of them arriving. A deed had been submitted that morning for the Carter property, signed and notarized. "Let me see it," Amelia said. She looked at the signature on the document. Her own name written in handwriting that was close enough that someone who didn't know her wouldn't question it. But she knew it wasn't hers the way she knew the sound of her own voice. "This is a forgery," she said. "Miss Carter, this is my name, and I did not write it." She set the document on the counter. "Mr. Peters, I need you to hold this filing until Judge Harlow arrives. Do not process it. Do not record it. If you do, You will be participating in a fraud that a federal land agent is actively investigating." Peters went from pale to gray. "Ma'am, Mr. Dade." "Mr. Dade is not a federal agent," Caleb said from where he was standing beside her. His voice was quiet and absolute. "And if that deed gets recorded before the judge sees it, every person in this office becomes part of what happens next. That includes you." Peters looked at the deed, looked at them. "I'll hold it," he said, "pending review." "Thank you," Amelia said. Outside in the full morning light of Orrin Flats Main Street, she stood for a moment with her hand on Clara's flank and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding since Thomas Pryor rode through her gate. "He's not going to stop," she said. "No," Caleb said. "He's not. The judge is in 2 days." "2 days," he said. She turned and looked at him. This man who had ridden into her property 8 weeks ago, barely alive, who had fixed her gate and her fence and her water, and sat watch through 2 dark nights on her porch, who had come back from the mountains, because he couldn't stop thinking about what was happening to her land, and had never once, not once, tried to make her feel like she owed him something for any of it. "Caleb," she said. He looked at her. "Thank you," she said. He held her gaze for a beat. "Don't thank me yet," he said. But the way he said it, the slight rough edge in it, the way his jaw held the words carefully told her the thanks had landed, that it mattered, that she'd been seen saying it by someone who understood exactly what it cost a person like her to say it. She put her boot in the stirrup and mounted up, and they rode back to the ranch together through the hot August morning, 2 days standing between them and the circuit judge, and Franklin Dade's next move already in motion. Somewhere they couldn't see it yet, and both of them knowing without saying it that the hardest part was still ahead. The night before Judge Harlow was due to arrive, someone cut Amelia's fence. Not the gate. Not the east line Caleb had just finished reinforcing. They went for the south pasture, the long stretch that ran along the creek, the one that would take the better part of a day to repair properly, and they did it clean and quiet sometime between 2 in the morning and first light, while Caleb was watching the North Ridge and Amelia was finally sleeping. He found it at sunrise. He stood at the break in the wire and looked at the cut ends clean. Deliberate wire cutters, not weathering. And he felt that quiet fury come back, the same one from the boarding house in Orrin Flat, but closer now, hotter at the edges. He didn't wake her right away. He walked the full length of the break first. 60 feet of downed wire. Her 3 remaining cattle had already drifted through into the creek grass. He spent 40 minutes getting them back before he went to the house, and by the time he came in through the door, Amelia was already up coffee on the stove, and she took one look at his face and set the cup down. "What happened?" she said. He told her. She didn't say anything for a moment. She stood very still with her hands flat on the counter, and he watched her process it, the way she always processed hard things, starting from the outside and working inward, getting quiet before she got clear. "How long to fix it?" she said. 3 hours if I work straight through, maybe less." "Harlow rides in from the South Pass," she said. "He'll come past that fence line." Caleb had already thought of that. "I know," he said. She turned from the counter and picked up her work gloves from the hook by the door. "Then we'd better start now. Amelia, I'm not going to sit in this house and wait for a judge while someone tears my property apart," she said. Not sharp, just final. "Hand me the wire reel." They worked fast, and without much talk, the way they'd learned to work together, each of them knowing what the other needed before it was asked. Passing tools and wire and fence staples in the rhythm they'd built over weeks of shared work. The sun was climbing by the time they were halfway through, and the heat came off the ground in waves, and neither of them slowed down. It was Amelia who heard the riders first. She straightened up from the fence post, head turned slightly the way a person listens when they're not sure what they're hearing. Then Caleb heard it too. 3 horses. Coming from the north. Not the pass. Not the road into town. From the direction of Franklin Dade's land. Caleb set down the pliers and moved to stand slightly ahead and to Amelia's left, not in front of her, not blocking her, just placed. She noticed it. She didn't comment on it. The 3 riders came up to the fence line and stopped. Two of them Caleb recognized from the ridge, the hired men he'd seen with Dade 2 days ago. The third was Dade himself. 50 broad through the chest, the kind of man who had been physically powerful once, and now wore that history like an entitlement. He had a pleasant face which Caleb had always thought was the most dangerous kind. "Miss Carter," Dade said. He didn't tip his hat. "Looks like you've had some trouble with your fence." "I have," Amelia said. Her voice was perfectly level. "Someone cut it last night." "That's aim," Dade said. He looked at Caleb. "Thornton." "Dade," Caleb said. A small silence. The hired men stayed back easy in their saddles watching. "I didn't realize you two knew each other," Amelia said. "We don't," Caleb said. "Not personally." "Your reputation precedes you," Dade said, and he said it pleasantly, which was how he said everything. "Mountain man, keeps to himself, lost his family in a fire up in Montana." He paused a beat. "Tragic. A man who's lost everything tends to make poor decisions when someone offers him a sense of belonging." Amelia's head turned slightly toward Caleb. He didn't look at her. "What can I do for you, Mr. Dade?" she said, turning back to the man on horseback. "I came to make you a final offer," Dade said. "Out of respect for your father, who I genuinely liked. Sell me the property, Miss Carter, today. Fair market price, which is more than fair given the condition it's currently in." He looked at the downed fence. "I'll take on all outstanding debts. You'll walk away with enough to start somewhere new, somewhere easier." "No," Amelia said. Dade smiled. It was the smile of a man who had expected exactly this answer and had already decided it didn't matter. "The deed filed this morning," he began, "was a forgery," Amelia said. "And it's been flagged as such pending Judge Harlow's review, which will happen today." Something moved behind Dade's pleasant face. Something that wasn't pleasant. "Those are serious accusations," he said. "They're documented facts," she said. "The blocked creek, the forged deed, the fence cut last night, all documented, all witnessed. And a federal land agent named Ruiz, who has been looking at your acquisition history across 3 counties. She looked at him steadily. "That's what today is, Mr. Dade. That's what Judge Harlow is coming to see." The pleasant expression dropped entirely. Just for a moment, 3 seconds at most, and then it came back. But both of them had seen it go. "You're making a mistake," he said. "I've heard that before," she said. "From smaller men than you." Dade looked at Caleb. The look was long and deliberate. "You've involved yourself in something that isn't your business," he said. "That won't be forgotten." "Good," Caleb said. "I'd hate for it to be." Dade held his gaze for another moment. Then he turned his horse and rode north, the 2 hired men falling in behind him without a word. Amelia watched until they were out of sight. Then she picked up the pliers. "He's going to do something," she said, "before Harlow gets here." "Yes," Caleb said. "How much time do we have?" Caleb looked at the sun. "Harlow rides in from Prescott. He'll hit the South Pass around noon if he's on schedule." "It's 7:30, Amelia said. "Yes," Caleb said. "Then let's finish this fence," she said. They finished it in just under 2 hours. Caleb was driving the last staple when he heard Amelia make a sound, not a word, just a sharp intake of breath, and he turned to find her staring toward the house. Smoke. Not much. A thin thread of it coming from the direction of the small outbuilding, the one he'd reshingled 2 weeks ago. They both ran. The outbuilding was where Amelia kept her documentation. Not all of it, she'd been careful enough to keep copies in different places, but the original survey drafts. The notebook with the channel sketches. The written record of the water rights documentation she'd been building for Ruiz. The fire was small, set at the corner closest to where the document box sat, just beginning to catch the wood of the wall. Someone had been there in the last 20 minutes while Dade had been keeping their attention on the fence line. Caleb pulled his jacket off and used it to beat the fire down before it could spread. Amelia grabbed the water bucket hanging inside the door and threw it at the base of the flame. Together they had it out in under 4 minutes. Amelia stood in the ash and looked at the scorched corner of her outbuilding, breathing hard. "The documents," she said. She went to the wooden box in the corner farthest from the fire. The smoke had reached it, but the fire hadn't. She opened it. Everything was there. She stood there for a moment with her hands on the edge of the box, and her head bowed, not in prayer exactly, but in something close to it. The private moment of a woman who had come within 4 minutes of losing everything she'd built for this day. Then she straightened up. She picked up the box. "We need to move these to the house," she said. "And we need to move them now." It was Peters from the land office who came riding hard down the south road at 10 in the morning, which was the last person either of them expected. He rode through the gate without stopping, nearly came off his horse when he pulled up short, and was already talking before he'd fully dismounted. "Miss Carter, Mr. Thornton." He was breathing in short, rapid pulls. "I had to come. Dade came back to the office this morning, after you left yesterday." He brought the notary who stamped the deed. Peters looked at her with the expression of a man who had made a decision and wasn't entirely sure yet whether it was the right one. "He offered me $50 to process the filing before the judge arrived, to backdate it to yesterday." Silence. Amelia looked at him. $50, she said. "Yes, ma'am." "And you came here instead," she said. Peters looked down at his hat in his hands. "My father lost his land to a man like Dade, back in Kansas. I was 12. We spent the next 3 years following my father around while he looked for work." He looked up. "I held the deed. I didn't process it. And I rode out here because you need to know what he's trying to do before the judge arrives." Amelia was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Come inside, Mr. Peters. I'm going to need your statement in writing." Peters wrote out his statement at the kitchen table, while Amelia stood at the window and Caleb kept watch on the north ridge. When Peters finished writing, he pushed the paper across the table and looked at it like a man who had just signed something that would change his life. "Dade will know it was me," he said. "Probably," Amelia said. "I'll lose the job." "Probably," she said. "I'm sorry." "No." He shook his head slowly. "Don't be. I should have—" He stopped. "I should have come to you sooner. The deed wasn't the first thing. He's been in that office before. Adjusting survey markers. Filing extensions on properties that weren't his to extend." He looked up. "It's been going on for 2 years, Miss Carter. I knew something was wrong, and I kept my head down." "You're here now," she said. "For what it's worth," he said. "It's worth a great deal," she said. "More than you know." She took the statement and added it to the box. They had 45 minutes before Harlow was expected. The judge arrived at 11:40, which was ahead of schedule, which was either good fortune or the universe balancing the account on everything else that had gone wrong that morning. He came with a deputy, a young man named Carver, who had the steady, watchful manner of someone who had seen enough of the territory not to be surprised by much. Harlow himself was 60 lean, with a white beard trimmed close, and eyes that had spent decades looking at people and deciding what was true. Amelia met them at the gate. She shook Harlow's hand. She introduced Caleb. She introduced Peters, who straightened up and looked the judge in the eye with the careful dignity of a man who had done something hard and was still deciding whether to feel good about it. "I was told to expect a land dispute," Harlow said. "It's more than a dispute," Amelia said. "Come inside. I'll show you what we have." She laid it out on the kitchen table. All of it. The survey sketches of the blocked channel. The timeline of the water access interference. Peters' statement. The letter from Ruiz. The forged deed. The original documentation of the water rights her father had held since he built the ranch. Harlow went through each piece slowly. He was the kind of man who read carefully, not fast, not performing thoroughness, but actually being thorough, and the room was very quiet while he did. Carver stood by the door and watched Caleb. Caleb watched the north ridge through the window. When Harlow finished, he set the last document down and looked at Amelia. "How long has the harassment been ongoing?" he said. "Since my father died," she said. 11 months. "And the creek was blocked approximately 9 weeks ago, based on the condition of the cut timber Caleb found when we went up." Harlow looked at Caleb. "You're a witness to the physical evidence." "I am," Caleb said. "And I can take you up to the channel if you want to see the site. The obstruction's been cleared, but the evidence of it is still there. The cut marks the placement of the rock. It wasn't natural. Harlow nodded slowly. He picked up Peters's statement. "And you're prepared to stand behind this," he said to Peters. Peters swallowed once. "Yes, sir," he said. "I am." Harlow set the paper down. He looked at Amelia with the measured assessment of a man who had seen a great many things in a great many courtrooms and knew the difference between grievance and evidence. "This is sufficient for me to issue a hold on any transfers of this property," he said, "and sufficient to request a full federal review of Mr. Dade's land acquisitions in this district." He looked at the letter from Ruiz. "This agent Ruiz, he's known to me. If he's already looking at the pattern, this will connect to his existing investigation." He looked up. "Miss Carter, I want to be clear with you. This process will not be fast. Dade will fight it. He has money and he has lawyers, and he is going to make the next few months uncomfortable for you." "The last 11 months have been uncomfortable," Amelia said. "I expect I can manage." Harlow looked at her for a moment. "Yes?" he said with a slight change in his voice that might have been the beginning of respect. "I believe you can." It was Carver who brought the news that broke the afternoon open. He'd ridden into town while Harlow reviewed the documents, and he came back with his face arranged in the careful, neutral expression of a man delivering information that had weight to it. He asked to speak to the judge outside. Harlow came back in 3 minutes later and looked at Amelia and Caleb with an expression that had shifted from careful to serious. "Dade filed a criminal complaint this morning," he said, "against Mr. Thornton." The room went very still. "On what grounds?" Caleb said. "Trespassing," Harlow said. "And theft. He's claiming you took 2 head of cattle from his north pasture sometime in the last 2 weeks. Caleb didn't move. His expression didn't change. But Amelia saw his jaw tighten just once, just slightly, and she knew what it meant. "That's a lie," she said. "I know," Harlow said. He looked at Caleb. "But it has to be answered. If Dade's complaint is formally recorded, Carver is obligated to hold you pending investigation." "He'd have to come in voluntarily," Carver said from the doorway. He was looking at Caleb with an expression that was impossible to read. "Or I'd have to bring him in." Amelia turned to look at Caleb. He was already looking at her. In the look between them was everything that didn't need to be said. This was why Dade had come to the fence line this morning, not to make an offer, but to see them, to look at Caleb's face, and confirm that he was the kind of man who could be removed from this equation. Not with violence, with paper, with process, with a lie filed in the right office at the right moment. Caleb looked at Harlow. "I want the complaint on record," he said. "Every word of it. I want it documented that this complaint was filed on the morning that you arrived to review evidence against Franklin Dade. I want the timing noted." Harlow nodded the request. "And I'll come into town voluntarily," Caleb said. "This afternoon, after you've had a chance to review this property and issue the hold on transfers." He looked at Carver. "Is that acceptable?" Carver looked at him for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "That's acceptable," he said. Amelia's hand was very still at her side. "Caleb," she said. He looked at her. "I'm not running," he said, quiet and even. "And I'm not letting him use me to pull you off what matters today. Harlow needs this afternoon to do his job. I'll go in tonight." "And what happens to you tonight?" she said. "Nothing," he said. "The complaint is fabricated. I've been on your property for 6 weeks, Amelia. Every person in that south pasture has seen me working your fence line, not his. This falls apart the moment anyone actually looks at it." "He knows that," she said. "He's not doing this because he thinks it'll stick. He's doing it to pull you away from here." "I know," Caleb said. "Then don't let him." His expression shifted something behind his eyes, going very still in the way it did when she'd said something that reached him somewhere deeper than the surface. "I'm not leaving you unprotected to make a point," he said. "But Harlow being here today and doing his job is the most important thing that happens on this ranch this week, so let him do it." She looked at him for a long, steady moment. Then she turned to Harlow. "Let's walk the property," she said. "I'll take you up to the channel site myself." Harlow spent 2 hours on the Carter Ranch that afternoon. He walked the fence line. He examined the recently cut wire. He went up to the North Ridge with Caleb and stood at the site of the blocked channel and looked at the evidence of the obstruction still visible in the ground. The disturbed earth, the remaining timber cuts the altered course of the secondary runoff. He took notes. He asked precise questions and listened to precise answers. Carver stayed at the house with Peters. Amelia didn't like leaving anyone unsupervised in her home. But she stayed with Harlow because her testimony was the center of everything, and she wasn't going to be anywhere else. It was on the way back down from the ridge that Harlow said something she didn't expect. "Your father filed a water rights claim with the Territorial Office in 1871, he said. "It should be on record." "It is," she said. "I have a copy. The original filing would strengthen your position significantly against any counterclaim Dade tries to make. The Territorial Office in Denver." "Ruiz," she said. "Yes," Harlow said. "Ruiz would have access to pull the original record. I'll write to him tonight." Amelia walked beside him and thought about her father, who had filed that water rights claim 20 years ago because he was building something and he wanted to build it right. Who had never imagined that the careful paperwork of a careful man would one day be the thing that saved his daughter's land. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me," Harlow said. "Thank whoever taught you to keep records." She thought of her father's hands, patient and precise drafting survey lines at the kitchen table she still used. "I will," she said. At 4 in the afternoon, with the hold-on transfers formally issued and the Federal Review request drafted and signed, Caleb saddled Clara. Amelia stood in the yard. "I'll be back by morning," he said. He was checking the cinch, not looking at her, doing it the way he did everything methodically, completely, no wasted motion. "What if they hold you?" she said. "They won't." "Caleb." He stopped checking the cinch. He looked at her. "The complaint is a ghost," he said. "It's made of nothing. Dade panicked and filed something he thought would buy him time. It won't." He held her gaze. "Harlow's already logged the timing. Carver's not a corrupt man. I watched him this afternoon, and he doesn't like this any more than we do. I'll spend one night in town answering questions that answer themselves, and I will be back here by morning." "And if Dade tries something tonight while you're gone," she said. "Peters is staying," Caleb said. "He's got no reason to go back to Orrin Flat tonight," and Harlow left Carver's deputy at the south gate. He looked at her steadily. "You're not alone." She held his gaze. There were things she wanted to say. Things that had been building over 6 weeks of working beside a man who had never once asked for anything. She hadn't freely given, who had turned his cattle south 3 weeks early and packed for longer than a day trip and sat on her porch through 2 dark nights watching the ridge. She didn't say any of them. Not yet. Not like this, with him about to ride into a town that had a fabricated complaint with his name on it, with everything still unresolved and uncertain and sharp-edged. But she stepped forward, and she put her hand briefly on his arm just once, just for a moment, and she felt him go still under her touch, the way a person goes still when something lands in exactly the right place. "Be careful," she said. He looked down at her hand on his arm. Then he looked at her face. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He put his boot in the stirrup and mounted. He looked at her one more time from the saddle. That long, steady weighing look she had come to understand meant he was making sure something was real before he accepted it. Then he touched his hat brim and rode. She watched him until the dust on the south road settled. Then she turned and went inside to load her rifle. Peters was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee when she came downstairs with the rifle. He looked at it. He looked at her. "Is there something I should know about?" he said. "There might be visitors tonight," she said. She checked the load and set the rifle on the table beside her. "I'd rather be ready." Peters looked at the rifle. He looked at his coffee. "I can shoot," he said. "If it comes to that. I'm not much, but I can shoot." She looked at him, this slight, pale young man who had ridden out of town this morning because of a memory of his father in Kansas, who had written a statement knowing it would cost him his job, who was now sitting at her kitchen table offering to defend her property with whatever he had. "I know," she said. I'm glad you're here, Mr. Peters. He nodded, looked at his coffee again. I'm starting to think, he said slowly, that I should have come here a lot sooner. Maybe, she said, but you came when it mattered. That counts. The night came on slow and hot, the way August nights did in the valley, and the house was quiet, and Amelia sat at the table with the rifle beside her and the document box in front of her, and she thought about Caleb riding into Orrin Flat, and she thought about her father's handwriting on the water rights claim filed 20 years ago, and she thought about the shape of what was coming. Not fear, not dread. Something colder and clearer than either. It was almost midnight when she heard the horse in the north yard. Not one horse. 3. She had the rifle off the table before Peters had finished pushing back his chair. Stay back, she said. She went to the window. 3 riders. Stopped at the edge of her north yard. One of them was holding something she couldn't identify in the dark, too small to be a rifle, the wrong shape for a rope. Peters appeared beside her. The 2 on the right are Dade's men, he said, his voice tight. The one in the middle is his foreman. Name's Cutter. She looked at what was in Cutter's hand. A lit torch. The cold in her chest became something else entirely. Something without a name in it. She opened the front door. She stepped onto the porch. She raised the rifle. You're on my land, she said. Her voice was steady and even and loud enough to carry. And I see what you're holding. I want you to think very carefully about what you do next, because I am not a woman who needs to be told twice, and I am not going to miss. Cutter looked at her. He looked at the rifle. The torch burned between them. You going to shoot 3 men, ma'am, he said. I'm going to shoot the man holding the torch, she said. After that we'll see. A silence that lasted exactly long enough for everyone involved to do their calculations. And then from somewhere behind the 3 riders from the south road came the sound of a horse moving fast. One horse, coming hard. All 5 of them turned to look. Caleb Thornton came through the south gate at a full gallop, and he did not slow down until he was 10 feet from Dade's foreman. And when he pulled Clara up short, and she turned hard on her hindquarters, he was between the torch and Amelia's house, and his rifle was already out of the scabbard. I'd set that down, he said to Cutter. His voice was the quietest it had ever been. The kind of quiet that doesn't need volume, because the weight of it does all the work. Cutter looked at Caleb, looked at Amelia, looked at the rifle in her hands and the rifle in his. He dropped the torch. He put his boot on it before it could catch anything. Dade's going to hear about this, he said. I expect so, Caleb said. You can tell him something else while you're at it. Tell him it's done. Whatever he thought was going to happen tonight, it's done. Tell him that from me. Cutter looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned his horse and rode north. The other 2 followed. The yard was quiet. Amelia lowered the rifle. She looked at Caleb, still on Clara silhouetted against the night sky, and she felt something move through her chest that she didn't have a word for yet. Something too large and too old to name easily. Something that had been building since a man she didn't know collapsed against her fence post in a summer storm. And she looked into his eyes and saw someone who had finally run out of places to run. I thought you were staying in town, she said. He dismounted. His boots hit the ground, and he walked toward her rifle in his hand, and when he reached the bottom of the porch steps, he stopped. I changed my mind, he said. The complaint. Dropped, he said. Harlow's deputy talked to Dade's notary for 20 minutes. The notary folded the moment someone asked a direct question. Carver released me at 10 o'clock. He looked at her. I rode straight here. She stood on the porch and looked down at him, and the night pressed in warm around both of them, and the torch smoke drifted up and disappeared into the dark. You knew they'd come tonight, she said. I thought they might, he said. I wasn't willing to find out I was right from the wrong side of town. She looked at him for a long moment. Caleb, she said. Yes, he said. The word he used wasn't an answer to a question. It was something else. An acknowledgement. A declaration. The particular yes of a person who has been asked something wordless and is answering it the only honest way they know how. She came down the 2 porch steps. She stopped 1 step above him, which put them at the same height, and she looked at his face in the dark, worn and steady, and more familiar to her by now than most faces she had known for years. Thank you for coming back, she said. He held her gaze. "I'll keep coming back," he said. "If you'll let me." The words sat between them quiet and enormous. She didn't look away. "I'll let you," she said. And the night settled around them, and the north ridge was dark and still, and somewhere behind them, Peters very discreetly went back inside and closed the door. The morning after Cutter dropped the torch, Orrin Flat woke up to news. Word traveled fast in a valley this small. By 7 in the morning, people at the feed store knew that Franklin Dade's foreman had been turned away from the Carter Ranch at Rifle Point. By 8, the boarding house was talking about the dropped complaint against Caleb Thornton. By 9, when Ruth Pryor walked into the general store, the woman behind the counter told her that Judge Harlow had issued a formal hold on all Carter property transfers and had ridden out of town at first light with a sealed letter bound for the federal land office in Denver. Ruth Pryor bought her flour and her sugar and walked home and sat down at her kitchen table and told her sister Dorothy exactly what she had heard. Dorothy Pryor, who had said "poor thing" in the general store 2 weeks ago, who had watched Amelia Carter walk out with her basket and her chin level and her back straight, and had felt something uncomfortable shift in her chest that she hadn't wanted to examine too closely. Dorothy sat with her hands in her lap and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "We were wrong." Ruth said, "Yes, we were." And Dorothy Pryor put on her good hat and walked to the Carter Ranch, which was 3 miles, and she walked all 3 of them because she didn't have a horse, and she didn't feel right asking to borrow one for this particular errand. Amelia was at the water trough when Dorothy arrived, and the expression on Dorothy's face when she came through the gate flushed from the walk, hat slightly crooked, hands clasped in front of her, with the deliberate stillness of a woman who had rehearsed something, told Amelia everything before a word was spoken. "Miss Carter," Dorothy said. "Mrs. Pryor," Amelia said. "I owe you an apology." Dorothy said it straight out, no preamble. Her chin was up and her eyes were direct, which Amelia respected. "What I said in the store, what I implied, I was wrong. I listened to a man I had no business trusting over a woman I've known for years, and I'm sorry for it." Amelia looked at her for a moment. She thought about the walk Dorothy had taken to get here. 3 miles in the August heat in her good hat. "Come have some water," she said. "It's too hot to stand out here." Dorothy Pryor exhaled like a woman who had been holding her breath for 3 miles. "Thank you," she said. Inside at the kitchen table, that had held more significant conversations in the past 2 months than in the entire decade before, Amelia poured 2 cups of water and sat across from Dorothy and let her talk. Dorothy talked for a while about Dade, about the things she'd heard and repeated without questioning about the way a town like Orrin Flat could turn a rumor into a fact if nobody pushed back on it fast enough. Caleb came in from the barn at some point during all of this, registered the situation, in a single look poured himself coffee, and went back out without saying a word. Amelia noticed. She thought not for the first time that he had an extraordinary instinct for when to be absent. When Dorothy finally stopped talking, she looked at Amelia with the expression of a woman waiting for a verdict. "I need people to tell the truth," Amelia said. "Not to me, to Harlow's office, to the federal agent who's going to be asking questions. If you saw anything, heard anything that Dade said or did, that's where it needs to go." Dorothy nodded slowly. "What did he do all of it? I want to understand it." So Amelia told her. Plain and complete. The blocked creek, the forged deed, Peters and his $50 offer, Cutter and the torch. She left nothing out, and she added nothing to it, and she watched Dorothy's face go from uncomfortable to pale, to something harder and quieter, that Amelia recognized as the particular anger of a person who has realized they were used. When she finished, Dorothy was quiet for a long moment. "My husband bought our land from Dade 12 years ago," she said. "I always thought he drove a hard bargain. I never thought to ask who he drove it from." The room was very still. "I'll talk to Harlow's office," Dorothy said. "And I'll talk to everyone I know. You have my word on that, Miss Carter." "Amelia," she said. Dorothy looked at her. "Call me Amelia," she said. "If we're starting over, we may as well start right." Dorothy Pryor looked at her for a moment, with something soft and genuine moving through her face. "Amelia," she said. "All right." The twist that came 3 days later was not what either of them had expected. Ruiz arrived in Orin Flat on a Tuesday, and he did not arrive alone. He came with 2 men from the territorial marshal's office and a leather satchel that he carried like it contained something fragile. He went directly to Judge Harlow, who had stayed in town waiting, and they spent 3 hours together in the back room of the land office before anyone else heard a word. When Harlow came to the Carter Ranch that afternoon, his face had the contained, careful expression of a man carrying news that required precision in the delivery. He sat down at the table and placed both hands flat on it and looked at Amelia and Caleb across from him. "Ruiz found the original record," he said. "Your father's water rights claim from 1871. "I know," Amelia said. "I have a copy." "There's a second filing," Harlow said, "attached to it, filed in 1879, 8 months before your father died." Amelia went still. "My father filed something in 1879, she said. "He did." Harlow reached into his coat and produced a folded document. He set it on the table and smoothed it open. "A formal property declaration, naming you as sole heir to all land water rights and improvements on the Carter Ranch in perpetuity." He looked at her. He had it notarized by a federal notary in Denver. Not local. Federal. He paused. Dade's people searched the county records and couldn't find anything because there was nothing to find at the county level. Your father filed at the territorial level specifically, so it couldn't be altered or lost at the local office. The room was completely silent. Amelia looked at the document. Her father's handwriting was on the bottom of it. She knew it the way she knew her own, the particular slant of the T, the way he crossed his sevens. She had learned to draft from watching those hands. High had known. He had been sick by 1879. She knew that the cough that had started that winter had been the beginning of the end, though neither of them had said it plainly. He had known, and he had gone to Denver, and he had made sure. She pressed her hand flat over his signature. She didn't speak for a moment. Caleb didn't speak either. He sat beside her with his hands quiet on the table and let her have the moment, without filling it with words, which was exactly the right thing to do, and she knew it. "This overrides the forged deed," she said finally. Her voice was even, mostly. "Entirely," Harlow said. "Dade's attorney knows. Ruiz showed him this morning. The forged deed is void. The fraud complaint has been formally recorded, and Dade is currently deciding whether to negotiate or litigate. Ruiz expects he'll negotiate." He paused. "There are too many other properties in the record. He can't afford to have all of it come to light in open court." Amelia looked at the document, at her father's signature, at the careful, deliberate act of a man who had loved his daughter enough to drive to Denver when he was sick and make absolutely sure she couldn't be taken from what he'd built. "He never told me," she said. "Men like your father rarely do," Harlow said. "Not unkind, just true. They do the thing and let the thing speak." She nodded slowly. She folded the document carefully and held it in both hands. "What happens now?" she said. "Ruiz meets with Dade's attorney tomorrow," Harlow said. "You'll be asked to provide a full accounting of damages, the water access interruption, the fence damage, the fire attempt. That accounting forms the basis for restitution." He looked at her. "And there are 2 other families I need to speak to. People who sold to Dade under circumstances that now look considerably different." Amelia thought of the 3 properties Caleb had told her about. 3 families who had faced water problems and sold. "Are they still in the territory?" she said. 2 are, Harlow said. "The 3rd moved to Kansas." He picked up his hat. "With your permission, I'd like to use your documentation as the cornerstone of the broader case. The creek evidence, the timeline. Peters's statement. All of it." "You have it," she said. "Every piece." Harlow stood. He looked at them both. Amelia with the folded document in her hands, and Caleb sitting beside her with the quiet steadiness of a man who had decided where he was and wasn't moving. "Miss Carter," he said, "your father was a thorough man." "He was," she said. "You appear to have inherited the trait." He left. The deputy went with him. The sound of their horses faded south. The kitchen was quiet. Amelia set the document on the table and looked at it for a moment longer. Then she pushed her chair back, stood up and went to the window. She stood there with her arms crossed and her back to Caleb, and she breathed in and out slow and deliberate, the way she'd learned to manage things that were too large to handle all at once. He gave her 60 seconds. Then he said, "You didn't know he did that." "No," she said. "I didn't. He drove to Denver when he was sick," Caleb said. "Did the paperwork himself, federal level." "Yes. So that even if someone got to the county records, there'd be nothing to find," she said, "because the real thing was somewhere else." A pause. "He outmaneuvered Dade from 4 years in the past," Caleb said. Something broke open in her chest. Not pain. Something more complicated than pain, something that had grief in it and pride in equal measure. And she pressed her knuckles briefly to her mouth and held it together because she was not going to cry at her kitchen table, in front of a man she was still learning how to be honest with. She felt him stand up, heard his boots on the floor, and then he was beside her at the window, not touching her, not making any move to touch her, just standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, which was different from comfort and more useful. "He knew what he had," Caleb said quietly. She looked at him. "Your father," he said. "He knew what he was leaving behind, what it was worth." He looked at the window. "A man doesn't drive to Denver when he's sick to file federal paperwork for land he thinks is going to fall apart without him." She understood what he was saying. She felt it arrive and settle. "He believed I could hold it," she said. "He knew you could," Caleb said. She looked at the document on the table, her father's signature patient and precise. "Yes," she said. "I think he did."
Joe.
The negotiation with Dade's attorney took 4 days. Amelia was not present for most of it. Harlow handled the formal proceedings, and Ruiz handled the federal components, and what needed her signature arrived by writer from town each afternoon with a note in Harlow's handwriting explaining what she was looking at and what it meant. She signed what needed signing. She asked questions about what she didn't understand, and Caleb sat beside her at the table each afternoon and read the documents alongside her and said nothing, unless she asked him directly, and when she asked him directly, he gave her his honest opinion without dressing it up. On the 3rd day, a document arrived that was different from the others. Dade was formally withdrawing any claim to the Carter property. In exchange for that withdrawal and for Amelia agreeing not to pursue civil litigation on the water damage. Ruiz was reducing the scope of the criminal investigation to the 3 original property acquisitions, giving Dade the opportunity to compensate the affected families directly rather than face a full federal fraud trial. It was Harlow's note, said the best outcome available, given what could be proven in court versus what was simply known. Amelia read the note twice. "He's getting away with it," she said. "Partially," Caleb said. "He forged my name and tried to burn my outbuilding, and he's going to write some checks and walk away. The other families get compensated," Caleb said. "And Dade's ability to operate in this territory is finished. Ruiz made sure of that. No new land filings for 10 years. Federal oversight on every transaction." He looked at her. "Is that justice?" She thought about it honestly. "It's close enough," she said. "It's not what I want, but it's close enough." She signed the document. She handed it to the writer, and when the writer was gone and the sound of the horse faded down the south road, she sat back in her chair and felt something she hadn't felt in 11 months since the morning after her father's funeral, when she'd stood in the yard and looked at the land and decided she was not going to leave. Relief, not triumph, not joy. Just the clean, quiet relief of a weight that had been lifted. Her hands felt lighter. The room felt lighter. She looked around the kitchen at the table, the stove, the window where she'd stood 10,000 mornings, and it felt different. Not changed. Just fully hers. Completely, undeniably, permanently hers, in a way that the document on the table made irrevocable. Caleb was watching her. "Stop looking at me like that," she said, but there was no edge in it. "Like what?" he said. "Like you're trying to decide if I'm all right." "I'm trying to decide if you're all right," he said simply. "Are you?" She thought about it. "Yes," she said. "I really am." The town shifted the way towns do, when the version of events they've been believing gets replaced by a better documented one. It didn't happen all at once. It happened the way most true things happen in pieces, through the accumulation of small moments. Dorothy Pryor talking to her neighbors. Peters, who had quietly been offered his job back by the new land office clerk appointed to replace the corrupt process Dade had been using, telling anyone who asked exactly what had happened with the $50 offer and what he'd chosen to do instead. The two families from Dade's earlier acquisitions coming forward, which meant their stories were suddenly in circulation alongside Amelia's, which meant it was no longer one stubborn woman making accusations against a wealthy man. It was a pattern, a documented one. Frank Lester, who ran the feed store and had been Dade's most vocal supporter in town for 3 years, came out one morning to find that no fewer than 4 of his regular customers had quietly started going to the supply wagon that came through on Thursdays from the next valley over. He didn't connect it immediately, but by the end of the week, he was considerably more thoughtful about which men he spoke well of in public. Amelia heard about all of this in pieces through Dorothy, through Thomas Pryor, who wrote out twice a week for no reason, he stated explicitly, but which she suspected had something to do with the fact that he'd started watching the way Caleb worked and was doing a great deal of quiet thinking about what he wanted to be when he was older. She let it happen without comment. She didn't need the town to celebrate her. She needed them to know the truth, and the truth was taking care of itself. What she cared about was the ranch. August moved toward September, and the work of summer shifted into the work of preparing for fall, and Amelia and Caleb settled into the new version of their routine with the ease of two people who had stopped pretending they hadn't already made a decision. How was building something in the barn on a Wednesday evening? She could hear the hammer, the particular cadence of measured, purposeful work, and she brought him coffee the way she did most evenings now, and she stood in the doorway and looked at what he was doing. It was a shelf, long and well-joined, fitted to the wall of the tack room where she kept things she needed daily but had no good place for. "You measured that," she said. "Of course I measured it," he said. He drove a nail. "Why would I build a shelf without measuring it? I've had 3 men build shelves in this barn in the past 5 years," she said. "Not one of them measured." He looked at her with an expression that said a great deal about what he thought of the 3 men who had built shelves without measuring them. She smiled. It came out before she'd decided to let it, which was happening more often lately. He noticed. He always noticed. She'd learned that he had the quiet attentiveness of someone who had spent years alone and had developed a sharp sense for the things that mattered in a person's face. "There's something I want to ask you," he said. His tone shifted just slightly. She felt it. "All right," she said. He set down the hammer. He turned to look at her, and she recognized the look, the weighing, deliberate look he got when he was about to say something real. "My cattle are up in the high pasture," he said. "I left them in the care of a man named Delaney who's managed the upper spread for me before. They're fine until October when the grass starts going." He paused. "But eventually I have to bring them down. And I have a spread up there that's been sitting empty, except for Delaney checking in once a week." She waited. "I want to sell it," he said. The words landed in the room with quiet weight. "Caleb, not because I'm being pushed," he said. "Not because it's not good land. It's good land. But it's—" He stopped, looked for the right words, the way he always did, not rushing, not filling space with sound while he searched. "It's a place I went when I didn't have anywhere else to go. It served that purpose. I don't think I need it to serve that purpose anymore." She looked at him. There was everything in what he'd just said. She heard all of it. "What would you do with the money?" she said. "Invest it somewhere with better water access," he said. He held her gaze. "And better company." She felt warmth move up the back of her neck. She kept her voice steady. "You'd be giving up your independence," she said. "Your own land. You understand that." "I'd be choosing something over it," he said. "That's different from giving something up." She looked at him for a long time. The shelf he'd built was straight and solid and exactly the right height, which she could see from the doorway without measuring. "You built that shelf for me," she said. "Yes," he said. "You measured it," she said. "Yes," he said again. "You've been measuring things for this ranch for 2 months," she said. "Every repair, every fence post, every pipe joint." She looked at him. "You measured for where you'd fit before you ever asked if there was a place for you." He was very still. "I didn't want to ask," he said, "until I knew I had something worth offering." The words were so quiet, she almost felt them more than heard them. She set the coffee cup down on the workbench beside her. "Caleb Thornton," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "You have had something worth offering since the morning you fixed my gate without being asked," she said. "Since you came back from the mountains 3 weeks early. Since you sat on my porch in the dark and watched the North Ridge because you couldn't sleep and wouldn't leave." She looked at him steadily. "I'm not the kind of woman who needs a man to have the right number of acres. I'm the kind of woman who needs a man who means what he says, and does what he says, and doesn't leave when it gets hard." She paused. "I've been watching you for 2 months. You haven't left, not once. Not even when it would have been easier." He took one step toward her. "Amelia," he said. "Ask me," she said. The word landed between them like something final, like the last piece of a structure clicking into place. He closed the distance between them in 2 steps, and he took her face in his hands carefully, like something he'd been waiting to be allowed to do, and he looked at her for a moment from the distance of an inch. "Will you let me stay?" he said. "Not as a hand, not as a guest, as yours." She looked at him. "I already told you," she said. The night cutter dropped the torch. "I said I'd let you." "I want to hear it again," he said. "Yes," she said. "Stay." He kissed her the way he did everything, without wasted motion, without performance. Just completely and really, and like he meant it. And she kissed him back the same way. It was Thomas Pryor who saw them riding past on the road with a sack of feed across his saddle, and he was 17 and had the good sense to look at the sky and whistle something to himself and not slow down. But he was grinning when he rode through town. And by Thursday, because Orrin Flat was Orrin Flat, Dorothy Pryor knew, and then Ruth Pryor knew, and then Mrs. Hollis knew, and the knowledge moved through the town, and it moved differently from the rumors. It didn't make people shake their heads or exchange careful looks. It made them smile, most of them. The quiet, private kind of smile that comes when something has arrived at exactly the right ending after being wrong for too long. Peters heard it in the land office and looked at the window for a moment and felt something in his chest loosen that had been tightly wound since the morning he'd ridden to the Carter Ranch. Frank Lester heard it at the feed store and said nothing because there was nothing useful he could say, and he had been working on saying less. 3 weeks later, a writer came from Denver. He brought a letter from Ruiz, and the letter was longer than any of the previous ones, and Amelia sat at the kitchen table with Caleb beside her and read it through twice. The federal investigation had been formalized. All 3 of Dade's fraudulent acquisitions were being reviewed for full restitution. 2 families had already received settlement offers. The third, the one in Kansas, had been located and contacted. And at the bottom of the letter, in Ruiz's precise handwriting, was a paragraph that Amelia read 3 times. It said that in his review of the territorial land records, he had found evidence of 2 additional properties outside the valley in the next county east, where the pattern of water access interference matched the Carter case exactly. Both properties had sold at distressed prices. Both sales had been facilitated through Dade's network. The federal investigation was expanding. Amelia set the letter down. She looked at the table, at the document box that had held her father's survey drafts, that had almost burned, that she had carried into the house in her own arms. "It wasn't just us," she said. "No," Caleb said. 5 families, she said. "Maybe more." "Maybe more," he said. She thought about that. About 5 families who had faced what she had faced. The slow pressure the water cut off the whispers, the isolation, and had not had a witness who came back from the mountains early, or a judge who arrived on the right day, or a son with a fast horse, and a mother with a conscience. "I want to write to them," she said. He looked at her. "The families," she said. "The ones who sold. I want to write to them. I don't know what it would do. Maybe nothing. But I want them to know that someone knows what happened to them." He looked at her for a moment, with the particular expression she had come to understand, meant something was moving through him that he was trying to decide whether to put into words. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said. And then, "Your father would have done that." She held his gaze. Yes, she said. He would have. She pulled the writing paper toward her, and Caleb Thornton sat beside her at the table where so much had been decided and built and defended, and he watched the woman who had dragged him off a horse 2 months ago and stitched his side shut and handed him coffee in the dark and stood on her porch with a rifle and never once asked for help in the ways that small people ask for help quietly, as though it might be refused, but in the way that strong people ask as a statement of fact, as a reasonable expectation of the basic decency one person owes another. He watched her write. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. He was exactly where he had decided to be, and the decision felt for the first time in 4 years, like something that was his entirely. Not running from. Not filling a space left by loss. Something chosen cleanly with open eyes in the full knowledge of what it was. He reached out and poured her coffee before it went cold. She didn't look up, but her mouth curved. "Thank you," she said. "Don't mention it," he said. And outside the September light was changing the color of the grass in the south pasture, and the creek ran full and clear through the property that bore her father's name, and now held 2 people's futures. And somewhere up in the high country, Caleb Thornton's cattle grazed through their last weeks of summer before the drive south, and everything that had been broken and tampered with and threatened was still standing. More than standing. It was theirs. The letters Amelia wrote to the 5 families took her 4 evenings to finish. She didn't rush them. She wrote each one by hand at the kitchen table after the day's work was done, and the ranch was quiet. Caleb sat across from her most nights reading mending tack, doing the small, useful things he always found to fill a room with without crowding it, and he didn't ask what she was writing or how it was going, which was exactly right because she didn't need to be asked. She needed to write them, and she needed him in the room while she did, and both of those things were happening. The letters were not elaborate. She didn't make promises she couldn't keep or offer help she didn't have. She told each family what had happened on her land. She told them about the creek and the forged deed and Ruiz and the federal investigation. She told them that what had happened to them had a name now and a record, and that the record existed because someone had kept documentation. She told them that if they had documentation of their own, anything at all, Ruiz's office wanted to hear from them. She signed each letter. Amelia Carter. Carter Ranch. Orrin Flat Territory. And she folded them carefully and sealed them with wax, the way her father had always sealed his correspondence, pressing his ring into the cooling wax. And she felt him in that gesture so strongly that she had to stop and breathe for a moment before moving to the next letter. She sent all 5 with the Thursday supply rider. Then she let it go. She had done what she could do. Whatever happened next was in other hands. October arrived the way it always did, in the valley suddenly completely with no negotiation. The heat broke overnight, and the mornings came in sharp and clean, and the light changed from summer gold to something thinner and more precise, and Amelia felt the shift in her body the way she always did, a kind of bracing or reaching for the longer rhythms of the harder season. Caleb brought the cattle down from the high pasture in the first week of October. Howe was gone for 5 days, which was the first time in 11 weeks that she had been alone on the property, and she was surprised. Genuinely surprised in a way that made her sit with it and examine it honestly by how different alone felt now compared to how it had felt before. Before alone had been the baseline, the given. The thing she was building a life around, not because she wanted it, but because she had decided it was survivable, and survivable was enough. Now alone felt like a temporary condition, an absence with a shape to it, a door left open. She didn't like the feeling of needing someone to come back. She also didn't pretend she wasn't watching the North Road on the 5th afternoon. He rode in just before sunset, Delaney behind him with the remaining cattle, and Clara was dusty and moving easy in the rolling way of a horse who had covered good ground steadily and was satisfied with herself. Caleb looked at the gate when he came through it, the latch he'd fixed in his first week still holding solid after 3 months, and then he looked at the house, and then he found Amelia on the porch, and his face did the thing it did when he found her somewhere he expected her to be. Not surprise. Recognition. Something warmer than either. She came down off the porch. He dismounted. He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at her. "The cattle look good," she said. "They do," he said. Delaney did right by them. How was the high country? Cold, he said. Getting colder. He looked at her steadily. I was ready to come down. She held his gaze. I know, she said. I could tell. He raised an eyebrow. You were watching the road, he said. I was checking the fence line, she said. The fence line runs south, he said. You were looking north. She looked at him for a moment. Yes, she said. I was. He reached out and touched her face once briefly, the back of his knuckles against her cheekbone, and it was so simply done that it took her breath away in the way elaborate gestures never had. I was ready to come down, he said again, quiet. She understood what he meant. All of it. The high pasture and the 4 years of living in it, and the particular loneliness of a man who had made a home out of distance because distance felt safer than the alternative. You're down now, she said. Yes, ma'am, he said. Then come inside, she said. I made supper. The first letter back came in the 3rd week of October. It was from a family named Aldridge, who had sold their property to Dade 2 years ago and moved to New Mexico. The wife had written it, a woman named Grace, whose handwriting was careful and slightly cramped in the way of someone who had learned to write late and valued the skill for that. She thanked Amelia for the letter. She said she had cried when she read it, which she apologized for, and Amelia thought that was the saddest apology she had ever read. She said her husband had been broken by the loss of the land, not destroyed, but bent in a way that hadn't straightened all the way. She said he still talked about the water some nights, the way it had just stopped coming one summer, without any reason they could understand. She said they had kept every document, every letter, everything. She said she was sending them to the address Ruiz had been listed at in Amelia's letter. She said, I did not know when we left that we were not alone in what happened to us. I thought we were foolish. I thought we had failed. I am glad to know we were not foolish. I am sorry it happened to you too, but I am glad to know. Amelia read the letter at the table, and Caleb read it after her, and neither of them said anything for a while. Then Caleb said, she apologized for crying. Yes, Amelia said. About losing her home, he said. Yes. He shook his head slowly, not in dismissal, in the particular quiet sorrow of a person who knows exactly what that kind of loss weighs. Write her back, he said. I will, Amelia said. Today. The twist that came in November was the one none of them had seen coming. Ruiz wrote. His letter was longer than usual and opened with the kind of careful phrasing that told Amelia before she'd read past the second sentence that something had changed significantly. Franklin Dade had not, as expected, accepted the negotiated settlement. He had hired a lawyer from Denver, a man named Aldous Crane, who had a reputation in federal courts that Ruiz described as formidable and persistent, and Crane had filed a counter-motion challenging the validity of the 1879 territorial filing on the grounds that the federal notary who had stamped it had died the previous year and his records were incomplete. Ruiz was clear. The challenge was unlikely to succeed. The filing itself was legitimate, the documentation solid. But it would take time, possibly months. It would require Amelia to provide additional testimony. It would require Caleb's witness statement to be formalized before a federal officer. And it meant that the full resolution, the final unambiguous legal confirmation that the Carter Ranch was Amelia's without contest, was not yet in hand. Amelia set the letter down. Caleb read it. He set it down. He's stalling, Caleb said. Yes, she said. Crane's good enough to know the challenge won't hold. Dade knows it. They're buying time. For what? Caleb said. To see if I'll get tired, she said. To see if I'll decide it isn't worth it and take a settlement. She looked at the letter. It's what he's always been counting on, that I'd run out of will before he runs out of money. Caleb looked at her. Will you? He said. She looked back at him. What do you think? She said. He picked the letter up, folded it, and set it on the document box. I think Crane is going to have a very educational experience, he said. She almost smiled. I need to go to Denver. I know, he said. to give testimony, and to meet with Ruiz in person. The territorial filing needs to be corroborated by someone who can speak to how the high country water channels were mapped originally, and there's a surveyor in Denver who worked with my father in 1869 and 1870. She looked at him. He's still alive. I wrote to him last month on the off chance. Caleb stared at her. You wrote to him last month. I thought it might be useful to know if he was available, she said, in case something like this happened. He looked at her with an expression that was equal parts admiration and something that might have been exasperation, if exasperation could be entirely affectionate. When were you going to tell me? He said. When I knew if he'd written back, she said. He wrote back on Tuesday. Amelia. He remembers the survey, she said. He remembers working with my father specifically. He says he has the original field notes from 1869. Caleb sat back. Field notes from 1869, he said, that predate Dade's presence in this territory by 6 years, she said. And that document the water rights access my father was granted as part of the original survey. She looked at him. Crane's challenge falls apart if the original survey notes show what my father filed in 1879 was simply a formalization of rights he'd held for over a decade. The room was quiet. Then Caleb said, You've been 3 steps ahead of this for weeks. I've been trying to be, she said. I learned from my father. You do the thing before you need it. You file it somewhere safe. You make sure it can't be lost. He looked at her for a long moment. Denver, he said. How long? A week, maybe 10 days, she said. I'd need to close up the house, get someone to watch the animals. She paused. I'd want you to come with me. Your testimony needs to be formalized anyway. And She stopped. Started again. I'd rather not do this part alone. She said it directly, the way she said all honest things, without softening it into something smaller, without performing independence she didn't entirely feel. He nodded once. Then we go to Denver, he said. They left on a Monday, which was Thomas Pryor's first morning as the temporary caretaker of the Carter Ranch. He arrived at 7 serious-faced and prepared in the way of a young man who has been trusted with something real for the first time and intends to prove the trust was justified. He had a list of tasks in his pocket that Amelia had written out, and he had gone over it twice the night before with his mother, who had revised it with him and added 2 items she thought he'd missed. Amelia went through the list with him at the gate. She checked each point. She told him where the spare pipe joints were stored, who to send for if the east fence needed more than he could handle, and what to do if anyone came down from the North Ridge asking questions. Tell them the property is occupied and there's nothing to discuss, she said. Don't argue, don't explain, just say that. Thomas nodded. And if they push, he said. They won't, she said. Dade's in Denver fighting a legal challenge. His men aren't moving without orders. Thomas nodded again. He looked at the ranch with the expression of a young man who understood perhaps for the first time that the things worth having were always the things someone had fought to keep. I'll take good care of it, ma'am, he said. I know you will, she said. That's why you're here. She shook his hand. He stood a little straighter. Denver was everything. Orrin Flat was not. It was loud and crowded and moved at a pace that felt foreign after months of ranch rhythms, and Amelia felt the strangeness of it in her body, the way a person feels the end of a long, quiet stretch. Caleb felt it differently. She could see it in the way he held himself in the city streets alert, in a different register, reading a different kind of terrain. They took rooms at a boarding house on the east side, separate rooms side by side, which neither of them made a comment about, which was itself a kind of comment. Ruiz met them the morning after they arrived. He was a compact, precise man in his mid-40s with reading glasses. He wore pushed up on his forehead and a leather satchel that looked like it had been everywhere. He shook Amelia's hand and looked at her for a moment with the particular attentiveness of someone who has been reading about a person and is now comparing the reality to the expectation. You're younger than I thought, he said. I hear that often, she said, and more prepared, he said, which I did not expect. Most people in your situation arrive hoping someone else has the documentation. My father was a surveyor, she said. I know, Ruiz said. I've read every page of what he filed. He sat down. Let's get to work. The 3 days with Ruiz and the Denver surveyor, a white-haired man named Elias Poole, who moved carefully and talked precisely and lit up entirely when he opened his field notes from 1869, were the most concentrated work Amelia had done since the week before Harlow arrived. She went through every document Poole had, every survey mark, every water rights notation. She cross-checked them against the copies of her father's records, against Ruiz's federal records, against the testimony she was building for the hearing. Caleb gave his formal statement to a federal officer on the second morning. The blocked channel, the physical evidence, the timeline, all of it laid out in the precise language of a man who had been a witness and knew exactly what that responsibility meant. He signed it, and they gave him a copy, and he folded it and put it in his coat pocket and came back to where Amelia was working with Poole and sat down and picked up the page she handed him without a word. On the third evening, Ruiz leaned back in his chair and looked at the assembled record on the table between them. Poole's field notes, the 1871 water rights claim, the 1879 federal filing, Caleb's testimony, Peter's statement, the photographic evidence Ruiz's office had taken of the blocked channel site, and he said, "Crane is going to withdraw." Amelia looked at him. "He's good," Ruiz said, "but he's not good enough to argue against this. The moment he sees Poole's field notes, he'll know the challenge doesn't hold. He'll advise Dade to accept the original settlement and minimize the damage." "And if Dade refuses his attorney's advice," Amelia said, "then he goes to federal court," Ruiz said, "with a case that falls apart in the first hour." He looked at her steadily. "He won't refuse. Dade is ruthless, Miss Carter, but he's not stupid. He's going to cut his losses." She looked at the table, at 5 years of her father's careful work and 3 months of her own. "I want it in writing," she said. "Whatever Crane files, I want a copy sent to Orrin Flat." "You'll have it," Ruiz said. "And I want the Aldridge family notified directly," she said. "And the others. Not through me, through your office, officially." Ruiz looked at her. "That's not standard procedure," he said. "I know," she said. "I'm asking you to do it anyway." A pause. "All right," he said. "I'll have letters drafted." She nodded. "Thank you," she said, "for all of it." Ruiz looked at her and Caleb with the expression of a man who had done this work for 20 years and was not generally given to sentiment, but who occasionally encountered a situation that warranted the private acknowledgement that the work had mattered. "Don't thank me," he said. "Your father filed the right paperwork. You kept it. Everything else followed from that." They rode back to Orrin Flat on a Friday, arriving in the late afternoon, with the sun coming in low and sideways, and turning everything a particular color that Amelia had no word for except home. Thomas Pryor was at the gate. He had been there for 10 minutes, she suspected from the way he was standing, not waiting anxiously, but positioned ready, like someone who had been doing his job and wanted to be seen finishing it properly. "Everything's good," he said. "East fence held. Cattle are settled. Creeks running full." "Any trouble from the north?" Caleb said. "Not a thing," Thomas said. "Quiet the whole time." Amelia looked at her ranch. The gate latch was solid. The outbuilding stood without a scorch mark visible from this angle. The south pasture showed the first real green it had grown since the creek was blocked. New growth, slow but real, the land recovering in its own time. "Thomas," she said. "Ma'am." "You did well," she said. He stood exactly as straight as the situation called for, and she saw him work to keep the pride off his face and mostly succeed. "Thank you, ma'am," he said. "I'll come back if you need me." "I know you will," she said. "I'll count on it." He rode back toward town. Amelia and Caleb brought the horses in. The letter from Ruiz came 12 days later. Crane had withdrawn the challenge. Dade had accepted the original settlement terms. The Carter property was legally confirmed without contest in Amelia Carter's name. The federal investigation into the 5 properties was proceeding. The Aldridge family had been formally notified. So had the others. Amelia read the letter once at the table. Then she folded it and put it in the document box and closed the lid. Caleb watched her do it. "That's it," he said. "That's it," she said. He looked at her carefully. How do you feel? She thought about it honestly. Like I can breathe all the way in, she said. For the first time in a year. He nodded slowly. Good, he said. Caleb, she said. Yes. She looked at him. I want to show you something. She took him to the north end of the property, past the garden, past the outbuilding, to the edge of the ridge, where the land rose slightly before it leveled into the upper meadow. It was the highest point on the ranch. You could see the full valley from there, the creek line, the south pasture, the house. Her father had built a low stone seat there years ago. She had come there every morning for the first month after he died, before she'd let herself stop. She hadn't been back since. I used to sit here, she said. He said this was where you could see what you were working for. Caleb stood beside her and looked at the valley. She watched his face. He was looking at all of it. The fence lines, the creek, the fields, the house, with the expression of a man who was learning the shape of something he had decided to love. It's a good piece of land, he said. It is, she said. Your father chose well, he said. He always did, she said. She looked at Caleb. He would have liked you. Caleb was quiet for the moment. Why? He said. Not fishing. Genuinely asking the way he asked everything because he actually wanted to know. Because you measure before you build, she said. Because you don't say things you don't mean. Because you came back. She paused. He used to say the test of a man's character isn't who he is when everything is easy. It's whether he shows up when it's not. Caleb looked at her. He said that, he said. His exact words, she said. He had a lot of exact words. I wrote most of them down. He looked at the valley. You wrote them down. In a notebook, she said. The same kind I carry for survey work. I've been keeping one since I was 12. She looked at him sideways. I have 12 of them. He stared at her. 12 notebooks. My father's words. Things I've observed. Things I've wanted to remember. What's in the current one, he said. She felt warmth move up the back of her neck. Things from this summer, she said. What kind of things? She looked at him steadily. The morning you fixed the gate without being asked, she said. The look on your face when we found the blocked channel. What you said about the Bitterroot Valley, the light coming through the mountains before the day gets complicated. She held his gaze. What you said when you came back. I'll keep coming back if you'll let me. He was very still. You wrote that down, he said. Yes, she said. Why? Because I wanted to remember it exactly, she said. The exact words. Because exact words matter. He looked at her for a long moment, the weighing, deliberate look, the one that meant he was making sure something was real before he accepted it. Then he reached into his coat pocket. She watched his hand come out with something small, a ring plain silver with a single turquoise stone set flat into the band the color of high country sky after a storm. I bought this in Denver, he said, the second morning, while you were with Poole and the field notes. He held it between his fingers. He looked at her. I was going to wait until it was all settled, until the letter came and everything was finished, and I could be sure I was offering you something stable, something you could count on. He paused. But I think you've counted on me since before it was settled. I think you decided to count on me in pieces all summer, and I just wasn't saying it out loud. She looked at the ring. You bought that on the second morning, she said. Yes, he said. We were there for 3 days, she said. Yes, he said. You waited 2 more days before telling me, she said. I was working up to it, he said. She looked at him. She felt the smile come before she could decide whether to let it. Caleb Thornton, she said. Amelia Carter, he said. Ask me, she said. He held the ring out to her. Marry me, he said. Not because the ranch needs a partner, or because it's practical, or because this valley expects it. Because I have been trying to leave this property since July, and I have not been able to do it. Because every morning I wake up here, I feel like a man who ended up exactly where he was supposed to be. He looked at her. Because you wrote down what I said, and I want to be worth writing down for the rest of my life. She looked at the ring. She looked at him. Yes, she said. He put the ring on her finger. It fit. She thought, and she would write this down too later in the notebook, with the green cover that she'd started in July. She thought that it fitting was maybe the least surprising thing about any of it. He had measured everything else before he built it. Of course he had measured this. She put her hand against his face, the way he sometimes put his against hers, briefly, completely, and she felt him close his eyes for just a moment. The way a person closes their eyes against something they have wanted for a very long time, and are finally allowed to have. "I'm going to need a bigger notebook," she said. He laughed. The real kind, unpracticed and sudden, and entirely him. She had not heard him laugh like that before. She thought, "I will hear that for the rest of my life." She thought good. They were married in the first week of November in Orrin Flat, in the small church that sat at the east end of the main street. Judge Harlow came back through the territory specifically for it, which he said was not standard procedure, and which he did anyway. Peters was there in the front row, employed again this time by the new land office clerk, who had been appointed by the territorial governor following Dade's removal from every board and commission he had previously occupied. The Pryor family came Dorothy and Ruth and Thomas, who stood in the back because he was 17 and standing in the back was correct, and also because he had grown 4 inches since summer, and the pew was too small. Mrs. Hollis brought flowers. Frank Lester did not come, which no one mentioned and no one missed. Amelia wore the blue dress she had made the previous spring, which she had never worn because there had been nowhere to wear it, and when she walked to the front of that church, she walked. The way she walked everywhere, straight and unhurried and completely herself. Caleb stood at the front and watched her come, and his face had the look of a man who was not performing anything, not arranging himself for anyone's approval, just standing in the full weight of something real and letting it be exactly as large as it was. Harlow said the words. They said theirs. Outside afterward, in the November light that was thin and clean and cold at the edges, Caleb put his hand at the small of her back, and Dorothy Pryor told everyone who would listen that she had known from the start, and Thomas Pryor caught Amelia's eye over the crowd, and she raised her eyebrow at him very slightly, and he grinned and looked at the sky the way he'd looked at the sky on the road that August afternoon when he'd ridden past the barn. That evening back at the ranch, Caleb built a fire. Not because it was cold enough to need it yet, because they were home, and a fire was the right thing to do on an evening that marked something. Amelia sat with her notebook open, while the fire crackled and the room was warm, and Caleb sat across from her doing nothing in particular, except being there, which she had come to understand was not nothing at all. She wrote for a while. Then she looked up. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes," he said. "What did you think," she said, "when you first came through that gate the summer? When you were barely staying in the saddle, and you saw the light in the window, and turned the horse toward it?" He thought about it for a moment. "I thought I'd made it far enough," he said. "That's all. Just far enough." She looked at him. "That's all," she said. "That's all," he said. "I didn't have anything else. I was just trying to make it far enough." She looked back at her notebook. She wrote, "He said he was just trying to make it far enough." He did not know then that far enough was here. She looked at what she'd written. She looked at him. "You made it," she said. He met her eyes across the fire. "Yes," he said. "I did." The fire burned low and warm. The creek ran steady outside. The fence lines held. The document box sat on the shelf with everything in it that mattered: her father's handwriting, and Ruiz's letters, and Peters's statement, and the field notes from 1869. All of it intact, all of it real, all of it belonging to the woman who had kept it. And Caleb Thornton sat across from his wife in the house that had never been empty, only waiting, and he was exactly where every road he had ever taken had been, trying to bring him, and he knew it, and he did not take it lightly, and he did not look away. Outside the mountains stood the way they had always stood, patient, unchanging. Witness to the thousand small ways that people find each other across the distances they put between themselves and the life they were meant to have. And inside a woman wrote in a green notebook by firelight, and a man watched the fire and the home they had built with open eyes and honest hands, and the particular courage of people who have already survived the worst and chosen against all expectation to hope again that home held them. Completely. Finally. And without question. The end.